So we're getting closer to the end of this section, but there are still a couple of array methods left to learn. And so in this lecture, we're going to look at the sum and the every methods. And to start learning about the sum method, let's look back at the includes method that we studied earlier. So let's log to the console here, movements dot includes minus 130. And let's also log our movements array so we can see it. And so indeed, the value of minus 130 that we're testing here is in the array, and that's why we get true here. And so we can use the includes method to test if an array includes a certain value. Now, however, we can only really test for equality, right? So basically includes here returns true if any value in the array is exactly equal to minus 130, right? And so again, this is essentially testing for equality. But what if we wanted to test for a condition instead? And so that's where the sum method comes into play. So let's say that we would like to know if there has been any deposits on this account. So in other words, we want to know if there is any positive movement in this array. So any number above 0. So how would we do that? Well, we can say movements dot sum, and now we can specify our condition here as always. So the same callback function, which has to return either true or false. And so a deposit is a movement greater than 0. So let's call this here any deposits and log it to console. And so indeed here we get true. So we have, of course, more than just one deposits here. But let's say we wanted to test if there is any deposit above 5,000. So easy enough, we can check if there is something above this value, and then it is false. Or we can check if there is something above 1,500, and so now it's true, because there is one movement here in that condition. And so you can see that these two methods here are kind of similar. The difference is that here it checks only for equality. So equality, but here we can specify a condition. All right. So basically this one here, we could rewrite it like this. So let's log it to the console here. So movements dot sum minus 130. So this would be exactly the same. And so that's why we also get true in this one. Now for equality, this doesn't make much sense. We could then simply use the includes method. But for the case we need a condition like this one here, or really this one, then the sum method is perfect for that. Okay? And probably if I would have named this method, I would have called it like any. But of course, that's not the real name, but that's really what it does. If there is any value for which this condition is true, then the sum method will return true. All right? And now let's actually use this sum method to implement our missing functionality, which is to request a loan to the bank. So we will do that right here between the transfer button and the close button. And our sum method will become useful here because our bank has a rule which says that it only grants a loan if there is at least one deposit with at least 10% of the requested loan amount. And the sum method will become helpful for this loan feature because our bank has a rule which says that it only grants a loan if there is at least one deposit with at least 10% of the requested loan amount. So that sounds complicated, but we will implement this here in a second. So button loan, add event listener, click, and this is now always the same, as you can see. So starting by preventing the default action. So that's always going to be the first thing. And then let's take a look here at the user interface, because right now it is hidden. So you see that here we only have this one field. This field is called the input loan amount. Okay, so input loan amount. So that's the element with this long class name. So let's copy that actually. And so let's start by actually getting that amount here. So we already know we will have to convert this input dot value. Okay. And now we need to create our condition here. So first of all, that amount should be greater than 0. Okay. And now let's take a look here at our flowchart again. So this is what I was saying earlier. The loan is only granted if there is any deposit that's greater or equal 10% of the requested amount of loan. All right. So here we need now our second condition, which translates that. And so whenever we see or hear the word any, we can already know that it's probably a good use case for the sum method. So let me show it to you. So as always, we get the movements from the current account object dot movements, and now on there we call the sum method. So you already know by now how this callback function feature here works. So we get the current movement in the current iteration. And now here the condition is that movement needs to be greater or equal than 10% of the amount. So that's the amount divided by 10. Okay. Or we could also do times 0.1. And so that's exactly the same thing. So 0.1 here stands for 10%. And so let's keep it like this. Give it a save so that it looks nicer. And so, yeah, if at least one of the elements in the movements array has this condition, so is true, so basically is greater than 10% of the requested amount, then all of this here will become true. And so the sum method is perfect to be used in a condition like this. So when we need to test for something. Okay, so in case this is true, oh, and I closed our flowchart again. So in case this is true, then add a positive movement to the current data and update the UI. So that's easy enough. So add the movement here. So current account dot movements dot push, and then of course the amount that was requested. And then update the UI. And for that we already created our nice function which does all of the functionalities in one go. And so that's update UI, and we simply pass the current account into it. Okay, and that's it. Finally, let's also then clear the input field. So that value equals empty value. So we did that here and also up here. Okay, let's log in. And so you see my deposits, my largest deposit is 3,000. And so the loan that I can request can be maximum 30,000. Okay, because 3,000 here is 10% of that. So let me try something bigger, so something really huge. And so now nothing happened. And again, in the real world, we would then probably get some error message somewhere here at the top or so. But in this case, we're not going to do that. Let's just try 5,000 now. And so now, indeed, it appeared here in our movements. And also, as you see, our balance was updated. And also here, our total income. Okay, now let's request 50,000. And so with this, you can now actually cheat. You can always create a little bit of a larger number. So now I can even request 500,000. And so that's cheating our algorithm, which is way too simple. But of course, this is just for testing purposes. All right. So that's how the sum method works. I hope that makes sense. And so let's now actually go back here and talk about the close cousin of the sum method, which is the every method. So let's write here sum and every. So again, the every method is pretty similar to the sum method, but as you might guess, the difference between them is that every only returns true if all of the elements in the array satisfy the condition that we passed in. So in other words, if every element passes the test in our callback function, only then the every method returns true. And that's why the method is called every in the first place. So let's test it out here now. So let's log to the console movements.every, and then with the same condition. So let's essentially check if all of our movements here are deposits. And well, indeed, they are not, and that's why we get false. However, we do have one account which only has positive movements. So let me show that to you. That's account 4. So account 4, all the movements are positive. So let's check it out now. So account 4, and then the same condition. And every is not a function. And that's of course because we are still missing the movements array. And now it is true. All right. And so that indeed proves that the every returns true if all the elements in the array satisfy this condition. Because in this movements array, all of the values are in fact above 0. Okay. So that's how the every method works. And I think it's quite straightforward, isn't it? And now to finish, there is one more cool thing that I want to show you. So up until this point, we have always written the callback function directly as an argument into our array methods, right? However, we could also write this function separately and then pass the function as a callback. So let's say separate callback. And so we could do this. So let's call deposit to this function. All right. And so this function here is exactly the same as these ones. But as I just said, there is no reason for them to being directly written here in all of these array methods. We could simply write them like this, and then all we would have to do is to call movements.sum, for example, and then deposits or deposit. And now we could reuse the same function for all kinds of different methods that require callbacks with a true-false condition. So that could be every or filter as well. Okay. And so here is the result of these 3 operations. And so here we get the expected results. And all by reusing this same function. Then if we wanted to change the function, all we would have to do is to change it here in one place. and then all the results would become different according to that. So in practice, that's something that we do sometimes, because this is of course better for the dry principle. So don't repeat yourself. That's always important, and it is important here as well. But anyway, with this small detour that we did here, let's now move on to learning about two more array methods.